purpose of Freethought Forum is to be vigilant to the encroachment of religion into government and to educate the general public as to what a freethinker is.
My thoughts give me power.
No scholar can map them.
No hunter can trap them. No person can deny.
Hello, welcome to Freethought Forum. I'm Catherine Fahringer, the producer of this show, and your host for today. This is our new winter 1989 season that is beginning today, and our first program is entitled To Pray or Not to Pray, which sounds like a reasonably easily answered question, and it should be, because it's a personal decision. Do you want to pray? You can in this country. If you do not, you don't have to. That is the beauty of our country. Today I have with me some guests who have opposing viewpoints on the problem of praying before organized sports events at schools, also before graduation ceremonies and things of that sort. And I'd like to introduce you to them. I have Rick Turner, who is the pastor of the Harvest Fellowship Baptist Church. Did I do that right?
Harvest Baptist Fellowship.
I knew I'd blow it.
Right. Thank you.
And he was quoted just recently in an article that was in the local paper. And my other guest is Mr. Vanstrom. He is a former, are you still considered a minister in the Unitarian Church?
Yes, I'm still a minister.
All right, you are not retired from that, and you're also a representative of the ACLU, correct?
Yes.
Then I have with me also Jeff Levan, co-director of the organization, Freethought Forum. So let's kick this off, and are we going to pray or not pray before football games at schools? So Rick, would you tell us a little bit about what you said in the article that was in the local paper?
I'd be happy to. We, in my office one afternoon, I received a phone call from the gentleman from the Express News, a sports writer, which surprised me to be getting a call from a sports writer. He informed me about the decision that was going to be made at Somerset concerning prayer at football games, and just asked me to give a response to that. He said that he was calling around to different church leaders and so forth to get a response. And so I shared with him that I feel like it's totally appropriate to have prayer before football games. I refer to the fact that we have chaplains in our Congress to pray. We pray in all kinds of situations, and refer to the fact that, of course, I'm an ex-football player. When I was playing football, we always prayed before football games. In fact, my football team at the end of a game would meet on the 50-yard line, and we would all kneel on the 50-yard line and pray before we left the field, whether we were at a home game or an out-of-town game. He said, what football team was that? And I said, Temple High School, Temple, Texas. And he said, well, I used to be a writer for the Temple Star-Telegram. Was that Bob McQueen? And I said, yes, it was. And so I guess that's the reason I was quoted in the paper, because of the contact in the Temple Star-Telegram. But again, I was simply stating my view that yes, prayer is appropriate. It had been throughout my years growing up in a central Texas town where you had Baptist churches all over the place, where you had churches all over the place, where it was the natural thing to go to church. There was never any question growing up about that. And in my mind, in my way of thinking, it still is appropriate to allow someone to pray before a football game.
Now, Vester, how do you feel about that?
Well, I feel that prayer is an individual matter. You can pray where and whenever you want to as an individual. But when you have the government involved, as the school district is involved in sponsoring a prayer before each athletic event, then you have you're entangling church and state, it seems to me, and it's against the Constitution and against the Bill of Rights. For a long time, individuals in groups have prayed together, and I have nothing against prayer. I use it as a meditation. It's a sort of talking to oneself about how one feels about an issue or about a situation, and that's very appropriate. Same way in the classroom. If an individual student wants to pray voluntarily, that's one thing. But if the school district sets it up, organizes it, and sort of presents that the school district is behind this prayer and approves of it and wants it as part of the curriculum, then we have to look to what the Constitution says. And the Constitution says that Congress shall make no law concerning the establishment of religion. And this, to me, in a small way, but in a pertinent way, is establishment of religion.
Well, Van, I have a problem with that because, as Rick pointed out, Congress prays, they have a chaplain, there's a little chapel in the United States Capitol. These things bother me. I feel that's an entanglement. How can we explain that that's an okay thing to do, which I think is not, in that they're setting this example that prayer is acceptable everywhere, and I don't think it is. So how do they cope with that?
I think they've done it on a matter of the tradition. It has been a matter of tradition, but I'm against the use of prayer too in the Congress, because what it does, it really belittles prayer. Because if you will notice, if you've ever been to Congress, when they open the sessions with the chaplain there's hardly anybody there in the chamber. He's talking to himself, so that it degrades the importance of prayer. Well, okay, but it just seems to me that it's a matter of tradition. They've always done it. The same way with the military. You have chaplains in the military. That's a little different thing because it's an emergency. We're at war or something like that, and you're depriving people of the right or their ability to have services and to have the comfort of a religion while they're in uniform under duress and under perhaps conscription.
Well, that I can understand, but when they're in a city the size of San Antonio with 1,001 churches, I have a little problem dealing with this, let's take the chaplains to the boys. Gosh, there are buses and ways of getting around, and there seem to me plenty of churches. But now, Jeff, don't you hesitate?
Point to that also, because I work on Kelly, and you know, working with some of the people, some of the airmen too, you know, there are times when they're not allowed off base, you know, and I can understand the use of the institution of a chaplaincy in the armed services, because the armed services tends to take care of its own as a little microcosm world, and especially during basic training, they like to maintain that that closeness of the, you know, in other words, many of these kids, you know, 17, 18, 19. Coming straight from home, they're trying to give them some discipline. Maybe their parents didn't, and although I may have different views concerning the validity of what the chaplain might be saying, any particular chaplain, as a service to those people, I don't have a problem with that. What I would have a problem with is that some people who would say that state and church shouldn't be any separation, that it's okay to have the prayer that we have to open Congress and such, were the same people who were saying no and were dead set against Paul Kurtz. In other words, these are the same people who are saying, well, secular humanism, therefore, is a religion. They want to claim it's a religion when it comes time, such as the Judge Brevard Hand case with the evolution in the schools. They want to say it's a religion, and teaching of evolution is therefore a precept or part of that religion. Yet on the same token, they don't want to allow Paul Kurtz to have his say before the Congress as a spokesman for humanism. And that was a case which was he took to court and lost. I don't know at what level, but he lost on that. So he didn't get a chance to say you can have it one way or the other, you know. Yes,
but it always seems to be there has to be their way, and that we don't get represented. I hope you don't mind, but. Do your congregation share this opinion then? Because it's been done, it's a tradition in Texas, and so therefore it's an okay thing to do, even though the Supreme Court has said that in this, I don't know whether you're familiar with the Jaeger case, all right, and they won in their effort to have prayers declared unconstitutional in a school setting. And that meant not just at football games, but the overall, in the overall scheme of things in a public school setting.
I think what we need to get back is to the basics, to the basic Constitution and to the Bill of Rights, and understand under what circumstances the Constitution was formed. These men came together and set up a government which had certain given powers. In other words, the Constitution can be referred to as a Bill of Powers. And the government only has these powers. And they set it up as a secular state, even though they were religious people in this pluralistic colonial situation in which there were different varieties of religion. They could see that they were headed for trouble when they would allow the establishment of state religions or the financial support of religions, one perhaps preferred over another, or even religion in general, because they could see that over the history of the human race as civilizations has developed, people do not agree on religious questions, and they have fought wars and killed and continue to do this over religious questions. And so I think it was a wise policy on their part to just limit the government to those things mentioned in the Constitution, and all the other rights and privileges were reserved to the people. And they said originally there was no Bill of Rights. That's the first 10 amendments to the Constitution, in which the First Amendment is the one we're talking about today. Right. And they said, some of them said, well, if we put in a Bill of Rights, why then they can assume that these are the only rights that people have reserved to them, so we don't want that. But the prevailing opinion and the prevailing judgment of the time was that we needed to be specific about what this government could do or could not do. And so it limited the government, and it gave to the people the freedom of religion, to exercise their religion, and to prohibit the use of government power to coerce opinion or to finance it.
I would agree that we need to go back to the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, but I would look at it from a different perspective. I really believe that when the United States was founded, it was founded as a Christian nation. I think we can look at quotes that have been left out of history books for years and years. We can realize that in 1947, Everson versus Board of Education, the Supreme Court at that point took a quote from Thomas Jefferson, took 8 words out of a speech that he had made about a wall of separation between church and state. And up until that time, that phrase had not been used. That same speech had been used by the Supreme Court in earlier cases. It was used in the 1850s when a Mormon man tried to get the right to practice polygamy in his own lifestyle. And the Supreme Court quoted Jefferson at that point, and they used his speech that was used in 47 to establish separation of church and state. They used his speech at that point to say that the nation lives by Christian principles, and Christian principles state that to have more than one wife is wrong, and therefore the court does have the right, the state does have the right to say to someone, you can only have one wife. The same principle that was used in 47 to say there must be separation of church and state, the same speech was used in the 1850s to say you can only be married to one woman. The context of that speech is that a rumor had gone around during Jefferson's presidency that the Congregationalists were going to be established as the state denomination. The Danbury Baptist Association wrote Jefferson a letter and said to him, we are concerned about this. He came and spoke to the Danbury Baptist Association, and he said in that speech that we are not going to set up an association or a denomination that will be the government's denomination, the national denomination. However, in that speech, as he spoke to them concerning that issue, he said to them that there was that wall of separation between the church and the state. That the first time that had been used, that phrase had been used, was in a sermon by Roger Williams. Jefferson quoted Roger Williams in that speech, and as Roger Williams' sermon is looked at, his sermon states that the church is in a garden, and there's a fence around the garden, and the world is not going to come into the garden. The separation wall is a separation that goes around the church to keep the world, to keep the government out of the church, in the sense that the government does not tell the church what to do, the government does not tell the church what to believe, the government does not tell the church what to practice. That was the quote that Jefferson was quoting. He used that speech. Up until 1947, it had never been used in that way. In 1963, the decision was based on the decision of 1947, and up until that time, our nation was founded. Patrick Henry, "Give me liberty or give me death," said, "It cannot be emphasized too strongly or too often that this great nation was founded not by religionists but by Christians, not on religions but on the gospel of Jesus Christ." John Jay, first Chief Justice of the United States Supreme Court, "Providence has given to our people the choice of their rulers, and it is the duty of a Christian nation to select and prefer Christians for their rulers." These men were stating very clearly that
they preferred Christians. Well, you're negating a lot of other people then, as far as roles in government.
What I'm saying there is, if we're going to go back to the Constitution, if we're going to go back to the original Bill of Rights, when the Bill of Rights were written, it was in order to protect the states. The states had concern that the national government was going to usurp their authority. And when the Bill of Rights were written, it was to give back authority to the states. The states were going to be able to run themselves the way, in a way that they wanted to run.
And also, I think that a lot of the founding fathers were deists who were influenced quite a bit by John Locke's philosophy, which and certainly Thomas Paine, people like that who may not have been signers of the Declaration of Independence, but nonetheless were ideological founders. Thomas Paine's pamphlets certainly had a tremendous amount of influence. He had influence on Jefferson also. Matter of fact, one of the things that he advocated to Jefferson was that he include a mention abolishing slavery in the Declaration of Independence, which I can see where that possibly could have averted a lot of trouble further on down through history, with the Civil War. I don't know how politically expedient it would have been. That's probably why Jefferson left it out, plus the fact that he owned slaves. But
I think we're losing the point. The point of the Bill of Rights was to prevent a majority from overpowering just even one individual. One individual had the right under certain circumstances, and one was in the practice of religion, to prevent the government from coming in and trying to coerce him as an individual. So we see all of these cases that have come up before the court are by individuals who are trying to resist the power of the majority to make a decision. And I disagree with you that this nation was ever a Christian nation. It was never set up as a Christian nation. It was set up as a secular state. Not one place in the Constitution is mentioned any religious word except for the fact that there shall be no religious test in order to hold a public office. And that's the only reference of any kind to religion. They wanted no part of it. They didn't want to favor religion. They didn't want to prohibit religion. They wanted it to be neutral. And I think that the 200-year history of this country, and even though there have been tensions over the times, these tensions have brought us the wisdom to see that this is a great doctrine. In fact, the Constitution is unique among all the constitutional documents in the world of setting up this separation of church and state and giving the power of one individual to resist the decision of the majority when it comes to religion.
And as you had made mention also of some of the original, the Constitution has changed too. It's a very plastic document. It can change our interpretation of it. The Supreme Court constantly reinterprets the intentions. It has to be that way. Otherwise, things like the Dred Scott decision would stay, would become sealed in law. We certainly wouldn't want that. We wouldn't want things like the 3/5, the position of 3/5 compromise, where they said that slaves count as 3/5 of a person. Over time it has grown, I think, as America has grown. Look at the civil rights issues that have come up and had to review the Constitution as to what was meant by separate but equal is no longer valid. That had to be looked at. So yes, you can say that in 1947, I think it was, as you quoted, there were also things happening like the McCullum case, where there was a woman whose children were atheists and they were in school and were expelled from school because they wouldn't join in the prayer at school. So that was the beginning of the prayer cases, as far as I know, at least. You probably know more about that as far as specifics.
Well, Vester, on that business about this is not a Christian nation, it was not founded on Christianity, don't you think there's a great deal of confusion about the settling of this country and the founding of it? There is a difference with the Pilgrims coming over for the religious freedom, who immediately got here and started acting like Hottentots. I mean, it really was a dreadful situation. All the states were divided. They all had different religions, and they had terrible punishments. What was that? Boring their tongues and doing awful things.
Well, for many years, a number of states had laws against Catholics and Unitarians and Quakers being able to hold public offices. And it became a divisive subject, and immediately the founders of this country could see the wisdom. Incidentally, Patrick Henry lost his argument in the vote that took place in the Virginia legislature and in the Constitutional Convention over this being a Christian nation under Jesus Christ and the like.
Thomas Jefferson, the Bible is the cornerstone of liberty. Students' perusal of the sacred volume will make us better citizens.
He perused it and rewrote it.
Well,
he perused it, took
what
out
I'm saying is to say that it's separation of church and state, to pull the 10 Commandments off of the wall of a school building. That is not the establishment of any kind of religion, in my viewpoint. To have the 10 Commandments on the wall in a classroom. It's not the establishment of a religion to pray before a football game. You
disagree with the Supreme Court,
religion. Then? Yes, I do.
Yes, well,
yes,
all right, but that's the law of the land.
I agree. I agree with that, and what I would say is that we need the Supreme Court to go back and re-look at some decisions and change some decisions.
Well, how would that be determined as to which God is to be represented in the classroom or before the game? I mean, by the popularity in that area? In other words, like you're saying, a small Texas town, pretty much predominantly Baptist or whatever. Would you say then that the individual community would have the right to decide what prayer would? In other words, let's say, for instance, in Hawaii, where you have a predominance of Buddhists, you have more Buddhists than you have Christians. Would you feel comfortable sending your child to a school where Buddhist doctrine was being mentioned every morning?
No, I wouldn't.
Other than for educational.
No, that's right. I wouldn't feel comfortable with that. I would have the right at that point to send my child to a private school.
Well, sure, we all have that right.
But
would you feel that?
I admit that if I'm going to say that we're going to allow prayer, that you open yourself up to the exact issue you're saying. You do open yourself up to whose prayer is it going to be. But at that same time, I would say that you go back to the local issue. And yes, if a local issue said Christianity, then that would be the rule of the local people.
I would have to disagree because I think it would be a.
There go our individual rights again.
Well, it would be the opportunity for a confrontation that I think would detract from the main purpose of school, which is education. Now, I have some interesting views where I differ with some other atheists or agnostics in that I think that learning of all on all levels is good. You know, I'm interested in reading the Quran. I'm taking a course right now, Bible as Literature. It's not being taught as literature, but that's another story. But you know, and I do think it benefits people to know about other people, and I would encourage also Christians and others to study the atheist point of view. However, in public schools, my problem with it is it's not being done educationally. It's being done like before school as a prayer, and what it does effectively, I know because I've been there, it singles you out. If you don't feel that way, I feel like a hypocrite if I bow my head to go along with the crowd, which I shouldn't have to feel in a free country, and I feel like I'm being a dog in a manger, if you'll pardon the expression, if I speak up and say, well, I don't think you should do this.
An interesting thing that I see in the schools comes with the holiday we have coming up this next week, Thanksgiving. How can you teach Thanksgiving and not teach that the Pilgrims were religious people? How can you teach Thanksgiving and not teach that those people were thankful to God? And yet there are children who go home from public schools in our country today who think that the Pilgrims were thankful to the Indians because the teachers are not allowed to teach in some settings that indeed they were thankful to God.
I think we're making a very important point here, but we must remember the distinction. You're talking about teaching about religion. You're talking about teaching a religion, that this is something you want everybody to believe, that that our government is behind promoting these religious holidays and these religions. And that's not at all. I have nothing against the 10 Commandments being taught along with the Quran in a comparative religion course, or the other scriptures of the world, and to make a comparison and to look at them. And I have no objection to a teaching about the religious history of the United States in a course devoted to that, for that purpose. But when you go from teaching about religion to advocating a religion or advocating a point of view and use the power of the state behind it, the school district, the approval of the Board of Education, the teacher standing up there as an authority, then I think you're imposing and invading the privacy of the individual to a student there who in elementary schools is certainly in the formative stage and ought not be influenced one way or the other. The church and the family ought to be the main teachers of that child's religion and leave the school out of it. The government has no business in furthering this religion.
The school has no problem in October promoting with all kinds of carnivals and fairs Halloween, which to some is a high religious holiday.
But they don't do it.
No,
as such.
I know they don't do it as such.
You know,
but listen,
Yes, no.
there are witches and there are ghosts and there are
But
what is the difference? What I'm saying is, what is the difference in that?
And
saying
organized prayer
and
before
simply
a game.
saying to it no, and simply saying to a child that the Pilgrims prayed to God.
some of them may
And
have. If they were
Thanksgiving.
like me, they wouldn't have. I'm very sorry. We've just barely begun to scratch the surface, and our program is coming to an end, would you believe? Do you think we could do this again sometime? Because 1,000 things have come to my mind while I'm sitting here listening to you all talk. So that's it for Freethought Forum today. See you again next week.
I think as I please, and this gives me pleasure.
My conscience decrees, this right I must treasure.
My thoughts will not cater
To duke or dictator, no person can deny. Die Gedanken sind frei, no person can deny. Die Gedanken